One thing you'll notice about my recipe is that I have reduced the amount of sugar in the cookies, including the amount of chocolate chips. So if you're looking for a less sweet version of chocolate chip cookies, I got you. I've always wanted to know how to make chocolate chip cookies from scratch. So it took me a really long time, then I finally figured it out, and then I started using fresh milk flour, and I was like, oh, I hope this turns out. And surprisingly, it actually did. So I'm glad that I was able to convert this recipe over, and I'm going to share it with you guys today. So I adapted this recipe from the Stay at Home Chef's chocolate chip cookie recipe. I'll link the original recipe in the description box below, as well as the ingredient list. This recipe makes 24 cookies. Let's start by weighing out the amount of flour we need. This recipe calls for 2.5 cups of flour. That's about 312 grams of wheat berries. When using fresh milled flour, I use soft white wheat berries for cookies. Once we get the right weight, we just put the wheat berries in our mill and watch the wheat berries turn into flour. So, did you know that the weight of the wheat berries before you mill will remain the same after it's milled and turns into flour? So long as you know the weight of the flour you need for a recipe, you can just weigh your wheat berries and you'll have the exact amount of flour you need for your recipe. Most recipes have a metric version of their recipe, so you can just click on that or use a conversion chart. I'll list some common conversions from cups to grams that I have found helpful in the description box. Okay, so let's get back to the recipe. We're going to start out by creaming together 2 sticks of butter, half a cup of brown sugar, and a quarter cup of white sugar. I am using cane sugar. Make sure that your butter is softened. Mine was soft, but could have been softer, because you will notice that I still had some chunks of butter that didn't mix in very well. Once you've creamed the butter, add in 2 eggs and 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. Mix in the eggs and vanilla, stopping to scrape the sides of the bowl as needed. Next, we're going to take our fresh milled flour and to it add 1 teaspoon of baking soda and half a teaspoon of salt and mix that together. I did include an additional quarter teaspoon of salt because the recipe called for salted butter and I used unsalted butter. So if you're using unsalted butter, include an additional quarter teaspoon of salt. However, if you're following the recipe and you have salted butter, then you're good to go with just the half teaspoon of salt. Then we are going to take our flour mixture and add that into our mixing bowl. Mix that in until you get a nice cookie dough texture. It doesn't take too long, and you want to be careful not to overmix. The last ingredient is chocolate chips. I do about 1 1/4 cups of chocolate chips. Then all you have to do is fold it into the batter until it's mixed in well. Alright, so next up is shaping the cookies. You can shape the cookies by hand or use a cookie scoop. This recipe makes 24 cookies. If you're going to shape your cookies by hand, you just take a small piece of dough and roll it in your hands. Roll it in between your hands to form a ball. Place your dough balls on the parchment-lined baking sheet, and then you can bake them right away or freeze them. I like to bake 12 and freeze the other dough balls. So one thing that you won't see that I did do is I like to rest my cookies in the fridge for 5 minutes while the oven is preheating to 350 degrees. This helps them not spread too thin. Then I'll bake them in the oven for 10 to 12 minutes. I took mine out at about 9 minutes. So you just want them to be lightly brown. So this is how mine looked like when they came out of the oven. Let them cool on the pan for about 5 minutes and transfer them to a wire rack to cool completely. I'm just going to cut my parchment paper so they can fit on my small wire racks. After they cool completely, another 3 to 5 minutes, you'll notice the wrinkles forming and the cookies starting to look like cookies. There you go, that's chocolate chip cookies from fresh milled flour. So could these technically be healthy now? We did reduce the sugar.